This is True News. I'm Rick Wiles, and you're listening to 1 hour of uncensored news and views. Well, here's an anniversary I'm confident you don't have marked on your calendar. The 35th anniversary of the Jonestown massacre. It's coming up November 18. Most people old enough to remember it have forgotten it. And most people too young to remember it never heard of it. And if you're among those who never heard of it, I'll just tell you quickly, the Jonestown massacre was the name given to the mass suicide of over 900 people living in Guyana at the People's Temple Agricultural Project led by Reverend Jim Jones. 907 people died from cyanide poisoning in an event called Revolutionary Suicide. 5 others died at a nearby airstrip, including U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan. My guest today is a recognized expert on cult mentalities. Mr. David Conn was the co-author of a book published in 1980 titled The Cult That Died, The Tragedy of Jim Jones and the People's Temple. He recently published a new book called The Pleasure of Fiends, an orthodox study of evil and the meaning in the Jonestown cultic horror. His website is truthsleuth.net. Mr. Conn, welcome to True News.
Well, fine, thank you. I'm glad to be aboard. We're going to have an interesting discussion because I think most people don't realize that same Jonestown cult mentality that existed and moved its way through California, because those people did not see the meaning of it, that same cult mentality, and I warned about this for the last 30 years, would grow and increase and reemerge on a grand national level. And that, I think, is what I saw in 2006 when I first saw this young, charismatic senator in Illinois. And then I wrote an article called Jonestown, Its Portent Has Arrived. And in that, I stated that I felt that at last that Obama is the reemergence of the Jones cult mentality on a grand national level, and I documented that years ago.
Oh, this is going to be a really good interview. I didn't even know we were going to go there, and I now I can't wait. Let's start, David. Let's start at the beginning. I understand you started investigating Jim Jones 11 years before the Jonestown massacre. Is that true?
No, it was almost 9 years, 8 years and 10 months.
Okay, so you were onto this guy almost a decade before anybody heard of him.
Yes, that's true. And I was just a simple guy with a simple job working in the environmental lab of what was then Standard Oil, the big environmental lab. I was a lead analyst with them. And so 2 of my close friends came to me within 2 weeks of one another. The first friend was telling me what a great and majestic leader this Jim Jones was, that he was like a new saint and he was going to just be the living end to society's problems. And then a couple of weeks later, another close friend, both of these guys I knew for 15 years, were very close friends. And this second guy came to me and said, there's a minister up there in Redwood Valley that is doing weird things with my ex-wife and kids. That's what he said. And so I thought, wow, this is something that leaves me in a dilemma. So that's what forced me then to travel up north for 2 hours, 2.5 hours up to Redwood Valley near Ukiah, California, and take a look at this minister. And it was just astounding what I saw. And because when I first walked into the auditorium and sat down, I took an aisle seat. And then a little later, when Jim Jones came to the pulpit, the very first thing he did was point to me and ask me to stand up. I suppose it was because he had people out in the foyer looking for people who were dressed not typically. I went up there with a suit and tie. And then he began to ask me questions. Why was I there and all? So I simply said, well, I'd heard about him, and I thought I would come up and see him. And then and then shortly after that, then he started his healings and these weird things where people would come forward, women would come forward, and they would be sent to the bathroom, and then they would have his nurses extract a tumor, and then they would parade it out, and the nurses would parade it up the aisle, this tumor. And so when the nurse came up the aisle near me, I stepped out of my seat and went over to take a close look at it, and she swept it away from me and rushed off the aisle. When I saw all that going on, I came back and I told my friends, this is a real charlatan, and he is also a radical liberal. And putting the two together, I saw a dangerous thing that was about to happen.
What made you think that he was a radical liberal?
Oh, for one thing, he went on about extreme social welfare and community action, and also he was not really a thoroughgoing, solid Christian. He talked about the God of the Old Testament was not a great God, and I as he went on and talked about social problems, I could just see it coming out. And that there's no doubt about that. He earlier on went into great detail about community organizing and all that stuff. And then then it was proven to be, because later, within a year or two, he was well institutionalized in the San Francisco political system, hobnobbing with the mayor and other big politicians, and also he hobnobbed very, very intensely with one of the more radical leaders in San Francisco, the Cecil Williams, head of the Glide Memorial Methodist Church, and he was a radical community organizer. He eventually sent many of his minions out to various communities in California who became pastors, and many of them were homosexuals, and who were parading the homosexual activist agenda. So it was pretty clear to me early on, and then I really got intensely into investigating him, and then when I gathered some really incredible details, I ultimately found out exactly how he was able to overwhelm people with his cleverness and his so-called prescient abilities to forecast things and understand what people were going through.
How did he do it?
I was fortunate enough to contact a family early on who told me this woman, it turns out that her husband was one of the guys that the first guy that contacted me to tell me what a great guy Jones was. And so he took 3 of their kids up with him to the cult in Ukiah, in Redwood Valley. And so that the mother decided to go up to visit her kids. And so, but she left her oldest daughter home. And so on her, she was, when she went up there and she arrived there, she then was asked to stand up in a similar way that I was, strangely. And Jones then began to tell her very strange things about her daughter's boyfriend. Well, it turns out that while she was traveling up to Redwood Valley, 2.5 hours north, her daughter at home received a call from a person who was representing himself as looking into the problems of people, and they were a Baptist group, he said. And so he began to ask her questions. Well, her boyfriend had come over that morning, and when he heard what was going on, he was a person with an intensely imaginative sense of humor. So he took the phone over because he realized this is very strange, and he outlined a lot of made-up problems that he had, all sorts of problems, drug use, and he went on and on. And it turns out that that's exactly what Jones told the mother when she was up there in Ukiah at the meeting. He told her all sorts of things about her daughter's boyfriend and the problems he had. Well, this made no sense to her because he was a fine young man. I mean, I knew his uncle, in fact. And so when she drove back home, she came into the house and said to her daughter, "This is amazing. Jim Jones started telling me all sorts of things going on with your boyfriend, Rick." And that's when her daughter said, "Well, did he tell you this and did he tell you that?" And she says, yes. What is going on? Well, that proved to me then the whole agenda that Jones had set up to find information on people. And then he would later tell them about it. And this went on all over the place. And the other thing that he did was have some of his cohorts go to people who were saying that they wanted to come up and see Jones. He got their names and stuff and addresses, and then he would have people stop by accidentally, go into knock on the door and ask if they could use their phone because they had car trouble, and then these people would let them in the house, and then they would go and ask if they could use the bathroom. Then they would go in, and they would look in the medicine cabinet and start seeing all the medical problems they had. And then they would observe things in the living room and see dolls that were on the over the fireplace. And these people took notes, took back to Jones. So then when they arrived up there, Jones would divine all this stuff. It's an age-old process, really, done by so-called
it's like a clairvoyant, a mind reader. He was devoting tremendous amount of resources and time to very cleverly and deceptively gathering personal information on people that he knew was planning to come see him, so that when they arrived, he could prophesy about them.
Yeah, right. And this went on
wow.
to a great extent because Jones had a lot of money because the cult members that were there would sign over their property to him. So he began to just grow enormously fast with all sorts of money. And so he was able to send people out to all these people. And you can see how that would expand. And then those people were just enthralled. It was amazing.
You know, David, whenever there is a cult like this, the mainstream news media always portrays them as, quote, right-wing religious fanatics.
Yeah. Well,
but the truth is, Jim Jones was far left.
He was a Marxist from the word go. Even in college, he was interested in very left-wing things and read Marx. It was back in Indiana when he got off base and started his cult activities back there. But then certain people in the media started to question him and look into him a little bit. But that's when he connected with the Big Disciples of Christ denomination. That's the seventh largest denomination in America. And he then made inroads with them, and they ultimately then, because they were a very liberal church group too, they then ordained him. And then he went out to the West Coast because he realized and understood their church polity, that they allowed the local ministers to have complete autonomy. no tie to the hierarchy and its regulations, because they were just a simple ground level authority in their churches.
So he managed to get a covering over his cult.
That's it, and this is another thing that has never come out. In fact, as after the first book was published, that's when I started my investigation into why he was allowed to go that long, and then I simply found out that his connections at all levels were very liberal people. And that's the.
Well, let's talk about that, because the trail takes you to a who's who of the West Coast Democratic Party leftist activist network.
Yeah, and that's the thing I'm trying to get out to the public now, because it turns out that of the hundreds of books and articles and movies and documentaries, none of them dealt with what it was that allowed him to go that long. That none of them dealt with his political ties to the liberal establishment in the media, in the New Age religious movement, and with the academics. All those he had ties to, and they were the ones that covered him, and especially so the what is tantamount to a bishop of the Disciples of Christ Church here in California. Whenever somebody started to look into him, that minister, that bishop, would come out to the media and make amazing statements as to what a powerfully good leader he is, and all his community enterprises and all that. And it just overwhelmed. But finally, I got in touch with one journalist, Lester Consolving, who was a very he was a conservative. Let's state it. He was
I know Les Consolving.
Yeah.
All right.
And he's still going strong
up
there in Washington. And
he works with WND.com.
Yeah, right. And so I met with him one night and unloaded this background and everything I had found out about Jones, because he was just starting to look into Jones, too, because he was a journalist with the San Francisco Examiner. And so he ended up, after that, basing a lot of the things he had found on information that I had given him. But he then went into his own research, and he finally got together with the Examiner, and they did eight of Lester Consolving's articles. 8 articles. But after the first 4 were published, Jones found out about it, and this is amazing. He then came down with hundreds of his cult members and surrounded the San Francisco Examiner. And he also threatened big lawsuits. It was to such an extent that the Examiner then backed off and did not publish the last 4 articles. But all 8 are available on the Internet for people that are interested. But that shows the power that Jim Jones had, and also high-level people.
Who were some of the high-level people that befriended him, protected him, and advanced him?
Ralph Nader. Harvey Milk.
The gay Harvey Milk, the gay city councilman of San Francisco who was shot and killed.
Yes, right. And the mayor, Moscone, and Willie Brown, the young assemblyman.
Yeah, who became the Speaker of the California Assembly and then mayor of San Francisco.
Right. And here is something that practically none of the public, and it's just a case of where the mayor sent Willie Brown up to the Sacramento State Legislature to push through a special bill that would allow the mayor to bypass his board of supervisors and appoint Jim Jones directly to this big position of head of the San Francisco Housing Commission. And that's in fact 2 years ago, I attended a meeting in Sacramento where Willie Brown was to debate Dr. Frank Luntz, on the often on the Hannity show, Frank Luntz.
Sure.
And during that debate, Dr. Luntz said to Willie Brown, he said, "Mr. Speaker, I'd like you to tell me candidly." And at that point, Willie Brown interrupted for a moment to say, "Dr. Luntz, I want you to know that I am always candid." And at that point, just shortly thereafter, I raised my hand and I said to Dr. Luntz, "Dr. Luntz, I'd like for a moment just to deal with that question where the speaker said he was candid." And then I turned to Willie Brown and I said, Mr. Speaker, do you recall back during the Jonestown event that the mayor of San Francisco sent a young politician up to the legislature to pass a special bill that will allow him to bypass his board of supervisors and appoint Jim Jones directly to the Housing Commission? And then I said, "Mr. Speaker, you and I know who that man was, don't we?" He was unaware. I told him later after that meeting that I had a copy of his special bill sponsored by Willie Brown. And so, but at that time when I said that, he said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." So that was that. Smooth liar. And then after the meeting, I went up to Willie Brown, put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, "Mr. Speaker, surely you remember that you went to the legislature and pushed through this special bill. I have a copy of the bill sponsored by you." And I also talked to another politician in Sacramento about this years ago, and he looked up all the legislation that came about after that, and it was tied directly to your legislation, in which it said in that special bill, it said the mayor can bypass his board of supervisors and appoint certain people directly to high positions.
David, why was Willie Brown and other top-level California Democrats pushing so hard to advance Jim Jones?
That goes right to my point. Jim Jones also got enormous power by way of his hundreds of cult members there in San Francisco. He was the one responsible for the mayor being elected, and other Willie Brown too. So they knew they were indebted to him because he got them elected. He had his cult members go all these precincts and put in vote after vote. And here's another irony that the public doesn't know about. A little later, when they started to look into voter fraud, it turns out that they had, when they went to get the voting material in the basement of the city hall, it turns out that all those had disappeared. And also, I should mention this, Jones's high-level aide was an attorney, and he was appointed in the district attorney's office there in San Francisco to the very position over voter fraud. So Jones's own right-hand man was the attorney over voter fraud in San Francisco. Can you imagine how bizarre this whole thing is?
Yeah, because I see how bizarre things have become nationally.
Yeah, so that's another thing we'll go into a little later, because all the parallels. When I saw this young senator in Illinois, I realized that he was what I had been warning about all these years.
All right, well let's hold that, and let's go now to, what happened, what was going on in Guyana, and that led to the mass suicide.
Well, two or three of my major sources when I was doing my investigation, they were ones that finally escaped from the cult. But they didn't go hundreds of miles away, as Jones said they had to. So they stayed there in Berkeley. And they then got in touch with some of Congressman Ryan's aides. And so that's when Congressman Ryan met with them and got all this inside information. So the media again was wrong because after the congressman was killed, the media made it out that the Congressman Ryan went down there without any information as to what was going on. That's an absolute falsehood, because Congressman Ryan knew more than even the people in Washington knew, because he met with these sources of mine and got all the behind-the-scenes story. And
what did Congressman Ryan know?
He knew that there were beatings, and that that Jones was had families moved around, and he moved the kids who were getting too close to their parents up there. He would move them to another family. And one was a terrible beating of a young lady, and also on his outings, this was Congressman Ryan became aware of this, that Jones would have kids on their outings and their picnics and stuff, had to eat bugs and lizards, and if they threw up, they had to eat their own vomit. Outrageous stories like this. And also, Ryan was aware of the shenanigans that he would pull just all over the place. One example was that during a picnic in the outing up there in Redwood Valley, suddenly there was a rifle shot, and Jones clasped his chest, and there was just a bloody spot there, and his aides then rushed him inside the building. And then shortly after that, they brought him out, and the nurse held his shirt high, sticking her finger through the bullet hole, supposedly. And it was all a charade. And the people just thought he was able to heal himself from a bullet wound. It takes pretty vulnerable people to believe that, but that's the kind of thing that Congressman Ryan was told about. Mm-hmm. So he knew when he went down there that he was going up against an outrageous fraud, but he conducted himself diplomatically, of course, didn't let him know all that he knew about him.
What happened in the shooting of the congressman at the airport, at the airstrip?
There were two planes that were there awaiting to take the entourage away. And when Jones found out that Ryan was going to take two or three of his cult members back with him, he knew he was doomed. So he then sent his henchmen out on a flatbed truck out to the airport. So they arrived there as they were all waiting to board these planes. They arrived there, and they had machine guns, and then they just started shooting people up like mad. Mm-hmm. It's an irony here, because back during that, in my investigation, in the latter part of it, when I found out in the last week that Congressman Ryan was going to go all the way out from Georgetown, Guyana, all the way out to Jonestown, I again got in touch with my people at the Examiner, Nancy Dooley and Tim Reiterman. But Reiterman, it turned out, was going down with Congressman Ryan. But Nancy Reiterman, the other journalist, was still there in San Francisco. And I phoned her desperately saying, look, I've been studying this Jim Jones's mind for almost 9 years. And I can tell you that I know that Jim Jones has some kind of a plan of action. I don't know what it is, but I know he has some plan of action. And we've got to get in touch with Congressman Ryan and warn him. And I said, because I believe that Ryan is not going to come out of Guyana alive. Wow. I said that and after that, it turns out I tried to get in touch with Nancy Dooley, and after that, it turned out that she had quit, and I never could find out where she went. But I think she was so devastated, because I wanted to tell her there's nothing really you could have done about it, but I just felt so desperate. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of ease her mind that it wasn't really her fault, because there's nothing could have been done about it.
David, for years there has been speculation that the Jonestown massacre was somehow a CIA operation
by the CIA.
Yes,
absolutely. It's just not true at all. However, Jones constantly told people that he had outrageous connections with all sorts of high-level people, and that played into it. But
in a sense, he did, because in California, he was deeply connected to the Democratic Party hierarchy.
Oh yeah, he was. Yeah, that's true.
But you're saying Jones embellished his connections. And so he deliberately told people that he was highly connected to people in positions of power.
In fact, he was highly connected in one way, because it's barely known by the public that he had connections to Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter's wife, and in fact she was so enthralled with him that she had a special dinner at a posh San Francisco hotel. Just a private dinner with him and her entourage.
Rosalind Carter had a private dinner with Jim Jones.
Oh, yes. And she not only had that, but she went on and on. She actually spoke from his pulpit.
Okay, this is getting straight. So how do we know Jonestown was not some type of mind control experiment?
Well, it's a specious portrayal of it,
mm-hmm.
because Jones he was not anybody in the CIA would see Jones's mentality very quickly, but they may have been observing the whole thing. That's true, because he grew so fast in his cult. So I can't really argue that they weren't observing it, mm-hmm. but that he was an instrument of theirs, no real evidence of that whatsoever.
Okay. So what took place on the day of the massacre? How were the events carried out?
After his henchmen slayed the party and killed a lot of them, Jones then told his people back at Jonestown, and people are a little confused about this. Why would all these people commit suicide? Well, Jones then told them that he heard that somebody had killed Congressman Ryan. That's what he told them. Somebody had killed him. And then he said, you know what that means? That means that all the authorities are going to come down here and land on us, and we're going to be in deep trouble. And so they had been rehearsing this mass suicide over the years in a kind of a charade type thing where they wouldn't know if it was really poison or not. But they were so devoted with him that they went through drinking it, but it turns out it didn't have cyanide in it. But they were preparing for this. And so he then went into the same thing and said, now we're going to drink our Kool-Aid. It was actually Flavor-Aid, but people call it Kool-Aid. And so they were so brainwashed and so afraid and so just terrified of what was going to happen when the authorities were all going to come down on them. He convinced them that they were better off dead.
And because they had rehearsed this so many times, they really didn't know if this was another rehearsal or the real thing.
I think none of them really knew that this was the actual poison that they were ingesting. And so that's how in a way, he was able maybe to get many of them. But it wasn't long, because cyanide is a very terrifying poison. A lot of people were seeing what was happening after some of them drank it. And so I think most of the people then were just aware that this is the real thing. But they were so desperate and helpless, and just absolutely, it's just very clear to me that they were out of their minds with desperate fear and chose and thought that suicide would be the best way out. That's not to say that all of them would, because some of them started to rebel and wouldn't drink it, but then they were forced to. They were forced to at the point of gunpoint.
Did anybody escape?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, the two attorneys that were there escaped. Yeah, they took care of themselves. And Tim Reiterman, the journalist that I had been working with, he escaped. Mm-hmm. And several others wandered off into the jungle. I don't know all of them, but of course, 908 of them just died. And,
David, I got about 8 or 10 minutes remaining here. I want to bring this fast forward to the present time. You said at the beginning that you thought this cult would reemerge later on a national scale, and you believe that it did with the appearance of Barack Obama as a national leader.
Not this cult would reemerge.
Right, but the spirit of this cult.
Cult mentality would reemerge, and because nobody ever really studied what allowed Jones to go that far. And so the public was unaware of the cult mentality. And, of course, we know that cult mentality in California went on and on. I didn't mention that one of Jones's buddies back then was Governor Jerry Brown, who spoke from his pulpit also. And so it turns out, ironically, that the whole crowd grew and festered and grew, and finally you see what a radical political element is running California now. And I tie it directly to that crazy liberal cult mentality that established itself pretty strongly in San Francisco with Jim Jones's help. And so now we've got crazy things like saying that it's a law now where a high school kid could go into a boy could go into the girls' bathroom if he feels like a girl. You probably read about that.
Sure. So when radio host Michael Savage says liberalism is a mental illness, he's not kidding. It is. It really is. It does create a form of insanity.
Yes, Michael Savage invited me on his radio show, that was back at the 30th anniversary of Jim Jones. And he had Lester Kinsolving and me on his show. So Michael Savage, in some ways, he's very astute on this kind of stuff. And I, of course, I felt all along over the years that this extreme liberalism, progressivism, is a cult mentality. There's no doubt about it whatsoever.
What are the signs that you see that's present right now in the United States related to Barack Obama?
The very first key sign of a cult mentality is the inability to see the obvious. And that was very apparent in Barack Obama. It was obvious that he was into himself and that he was really had no real concern about anything going on except his own rising up through the political power structure. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And here's another sign, kind of not too understood, I think, by people. Maybe some cult experts understand it, but there's this question of seeing the self as the major thing that's going on, rather than caring what's going on out in the public arena.
So, are you referring to Obama's narcissism?
Yes, narcissism and charisma, because his charisma had to be there to allow him to get that far. That's another parallel he had with Jim Jones. I've got several parallels between Obama and Jim Jones, by the way, if you want to go into them later.
No, I'll tell you what. I'm going to I'm going to extend a few more minutes. I want to hear what you have about Mr. Obama.
Okay. First off, Jones captured the media, and Obama captured the media. Jones had a strange childhood, a father, a drunk, a mother that had to fend for itself, and so Jimmy Jones, he was very lonely and not really looked after by a father figure. Jones ended up as a highly egocentric, narcissistic, charismatic man who would do and say anything that would get him ahead. No real and deep-seated principles, and that's obvious. And the same way, Obama attacked the lone media organization that began researching him critically, talk shows and their pundits going on Fox News. Obama captured and captivated the rest of the media. One of them was so in love with Obama that Chris Matthews, lost his cool and said he got a tingle up his leg. Mm-hmm. Obama also captured and captivated the politicians and even moderate Democrats, those that were ordinarily fairly sane and seemed to have fallen blindly before this blazing young political messiah. And Obama had also had a very strange childhood. Father deserted him, the child, when he was 2 years old. Obama's only father figure was a terribly nasty old man, a pornographer and a child molester and a cocaine user who was an avowed communist.
Frank Marshall Davis.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we could go into that, how weird he was, and it's pretty well established that Frank Marshall Davis was the one that got Obama into cocaine, and also both of them, Jones and Obama, had a background of community organizing, mingled with radical and terrorists, and also we had some evidence that Jones was connected with some of the radical terrorist groups back then, but Obama for sure was connected with terrorists. Like
Bill Ayers.
Yeah, Cass
Sunstein. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what's his wife's name? I forgot.
Bernadine
Dorn.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both. And then there was another one. There was another terrorist group out of that. Don, I'm sorry,
David. What about the way early in the 2008 campaign, people were fainting in the presence of Obama.
They used to do that with Jones too. He had an enormous influence over people. He would wave his hand, and they would be slain in the spirit. And you cannot exaggerate what a remarkable thing, the combination of charisma and narcissism can do with people.
Well, David, let me ask you this. If this spirit that was on, this evil spirit that was on Jim Jones, if it is present with Barack Obama and it descends on the country on a national scale, what possibly could happen?
Well, I think, that allows me then to go into an example of what can happen. Because you see, one thing about a cult leader is that from then on, he will appoint only people with his same cult mentality in charge of all the enterprises that he's got going. That's the only people he will. He won't appoint people with normal, sensible mentalities that will get about the business of doing the right thing. And that's why I believe, and this is a major point that I just wanted to make fairly recently because of what happens on Obamacare and what the president had to say this morning. The reason Obamacare is the major failure that it is because everyone that is connected with it were appointees of a cult leader like Obama with the same mentality, and they have no idea how to do things right, but they do have a powerful idea on how to pull off his major agenda, which is this radical leftist and almost terrifying agenda.
So their expertise is in deception and revolution.
Exactly. They have learned to lie ferociously. You know, I made an amazing warning back in 2006 when I first saw Obama. And as it fleshed out and became more obvious, I then said in an article that was publicized on the San Diego State University's Jonestown website, I said that Obama is the reemergence of Jim Jones type of cult mentality. And I warned that he would end up as far more dangerous than Jim Jones. And this was printed back in 2008. I wrote the article in the winter of 2007, 2008, but it was published on the San Diego State University's website, where I warned that Obama would be far more dangerous than Jones, had a similar cult mentality, not quite as pathological, but nevertheless.
David, what do you think could happen if this cult mentality of Barack Obama is allowed to run its course unfettered?
Oh, I keep most of this to myself. I don't even want to. I'm reluctant to say that I think we're pretty much done for. In fact, I've said it. I think there's only a 70%, a 30% chance that we're going to survive. There's a 70% chance that we're seeing the end of everything that America stood for.
Well,
I really believe that.
I say that almost every day on this program, so you're not shocking our audience. So you can go ahead.
Yeah.
And,
well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, you can go ahead and express yourself on this, because this is where I'm at. I believe I used to say we're on the edge of the cliff. Well, now I think we went over the cliff. And
yeah, well, then I think your audience may be pretty much into thinking what I really believe, and I said this back in that same article. Jonestown, its portent has arrived. That was the name of that article. People can see that on the internet. Jonestown, its portent has arrived. I said that Obama is the leader of a massive cult himself. He's the leader of the cult, and the cult is Islam, and he leads it by way of being its major Western world defender. And it's just that simple.
You believe that Barack Obama is leading an Islamic cult inside America, that he is conditioning America to open itself up to Islamic culture and beliefs.
And people can go back and see how many Muslims were brought over after the wars in the Mideast, how many have come over, and many of them, of course, established themselves up in Michigan, and that's why the cult establishment of Sharia, of the Islamic law, is starting to be institutionalized there.
Is Barack Obama leading America to a cultural suicide?
Oh, yes.
I mean, a cultural Jonestown massacre.
Yes. That's why I said he's far more dangerous, because already what's going on has caused, I think, enormous amounts of people who have just lost everything they've had, and who knows how many suicides. It's just a devastating thing on America.
It does seem, in recent years, there's like a mass insanity that's sweeping the land.
That's right, and that insanity, by the way, is what I said. It's the key element of a cult mentality: the inability to see the obvious. And it's just amazing why people could not see the obvious of what's going on. It just blows me away. It's so obvious, but it's run by a powerful cult-like establishment that is in control, and it has its power over the media. And if anybody gets out of line, they really get torn apart.
I mean,
and Fox News is already yielding a little bit to it.
Sure, they're all intimidated by it. I mean, look at the at the budget. The government shutdown in early October, where you had Mr. Obama telling the leaders of the Congress, "I will not negotiate with you. Period. Do as I say." And you had grown men and women in the United States Congress who did not challenge him, who did not say to him, "Excuse me, but we were elected also, and you're going to have to cut some spending." Nobody would do it. Yeah. And they just marched in lockstep like zombies and gave him the power.
Just exactly like cult members. Follow the leader, and they're just absolutely part of them are in fear, and they don't know what to do.
Is he becoming an Adolf Hitler?
Oh, sure. Of course, in an obviously different way, his approach to undermining everything that the country stands for is a different approach. He's the extremist on the radical liberal side, the Marxist side and socialism and all that. But
in essence, he's persuading the American people to drink cultural, political, financial cyanide.
They're already gulping it in just big gulps of it, going down all over the place. It's so pathetic. I just hardly know how to deal with it. The irony is, I went 7 years before getting the attention to the media on Jim Jones. I went 7.5 years of my 9 years investigation before the mass murder, and even then, they got onto him because I was informed on that far through my investigation, 18 months before the mass murder. I was informed on, and Jones then found out everything that I had on him, and so he threatened my life, and I went into hiding for 18 months and continued my investigation and stuff. But he then went to the media, and as Obama is doing, really, he's blaming the whole thing on other people. He never once ever even hinted that it is due to him, his fault. No way was it anything to do with his fault.
Which is another sign of the mental illness.
Oh yeah, Jones did the same thing. He blamed his cult being damaged. He went to the San Francisco media and blamed me as a person who's trying to destroy his church. He said,
David, I got 1 minute remaining. You were right in 2006 in your warning. You said Obama is the reemergence of Jim Jones mentality. You said he's going to be the leader of an Islamic cult. You said that in 2006. So in 2013, knowing what you know about cults and watching Obama, what do you think we're going to be talking about in 2 years, 5 years from now about what has happened to this country? Can you sum it up in 1 minute?
Well, I believe that that far in the future, I believe we're going to look back and see a major misdirection of this country to the point where it's never going to recover to what it used to be. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. He's already entrenched himself with this cult mentality, and the liberals are just not able to wake up and see it honestly. They cannot see the facts of what's going on. They're unable to see the obvious, and therefore it's going to go to outrageous extremes. And like I say, I think only a 30% chance that we'll even survive as a nation. But we're not going to ever survive as the nation that we used to be.
So the damage is irreparable. My guest, Mr. David Conn, and he co-authored a book in 1980 called The Cult That Died, The Tragedy of Jim Jones. And his latest book just released, The Pleasure of Fiends, an Orthodox Study of Evil and the Meaning in the Jonestown Cultic Horror. Mr. Conn's website is truthsleuth.net. David, thank you so much for this interview.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Well, I got to be totally frank with you. I was not prepared for where this interview went today. When I first invited Mr. Conn to come on the program, it was because the 35th anniversary of the Jim Jones massacre was coming up in the month of November, and I simply wanted him to talk about what happened and to educate us about these religious cults. I was not expecting him to draw a connection between Jim Jones and Barack Obama, and so what we've learned here today is that Barack Obama has all of the markings of Jim Jones. He is a cultist. Now this makes sense of why people were fainting in 2008. And just a few weeks ago, remember the pregnant woman who fainted? That was completely staged. Watch the YouTube video. You will see that it was a completely staged, fake fainting spell. This man is a lunatic. He is a cultist. He is like Jim Jones. He wants people to worship him. He wants people to believe he has this aura that when he walks into the room, people become lightheaded and they fall down in his presence. These are all the signs of a mentally demented psychopath, a man who has the potential of becoming an Adolf Hitler. Well, it's been an amazing interview today, and I hope this has been enlightening to you. Please do what you have to do to spread this program around on the Internet. Get it on your Facebook pages and tell your friends about it. Email it around. Hey, last call. We're at the end of the week, the end of the month. We need your support for True News. Go to our website, TruNews.com. Make the very best donation you can, or get a check or money order in the mail. God bless you. We thoroughly thank God for our supporters, our family of friends who support this ministry. Take care. Bye.